Open your Bibles with me to John chapter 11. Well, we're going to head to John chapter 11 because that's where we are in our study. But stop off on your way to John chapter 6. Little Bible context, if you will. I'm going to underscore the obvious right now, but it'll go to a broader point in a little bit. I think we can agree that the apostles, at least we'll describe the apostles as the 11. We know Judas was described as a devil. But the apostles were saved believers and followers of Jesus Christ. Notice what was said in John chapter 6. Let's remind ourselves of what we studied back then in verse 66. From that time, many of his disciples went back and walked no more with him, with Jesus. Then said Jesus unto the 12, Will you also go away? And Simon Peter answered him, Lord, to whom shall we go? Thou hast the words of eternal life. And we believe that thou, and are sure that thou art the Christ, the Son of the living God. Now, Jesus' commentary, and one exception to that is in 70 and 71. Jesus answered them, Have I not chosen you 12, and one of you is a devil? He spake of Judas Iscariot, the son of Simon, for he it was that should betray him, being one of the 12. And that was, of course, by God's design and for God's purpose. But we can agree that the apostles, the 11, were saved individuals, followers of Christ, strong believers. And it'll make sense why I'm underscoring that. Let's go back to our text in John, going to the end of chapter 10, the last, not the last verse, but verses 39 and 40, and remind ourselves that after the most recent threat upon his life, they retreated to beyond Jordan. Verse 39, Therefore they sought again to take him, but he escaped out of their hand and went away again beyond Jordan into a place where John at first had baptized, and there he abode. So we leave off in chapter 10 with the Lord abiding beyond Jordan and staying there for safety's sake. Chapter 11 enters onto the scene, and we're of course familiar with the overall events of chapter 11. Their friend Lazarus was sick, and he was nigh unto death, and indeed did die. Verse 6, after they'd heard the things concerning Lazarus, verse 6, when he had heard therefore that he was sick, he abode 2 days still in the same place where he was. So even after he knew and announced that Lazarus was sick, he abode 2 more days. We're reminded in verse 4 that this is all done for a purpose. The sickness is not unto death, but for the glory of God. And we worked verse 4 a couple of weeks ago, reminding everything that God does, he does on purpose and for a purpose. And we don't always understand those purposes, especially on this side of the event. We sometimes can look back and see some of the Lord's purposes. But he tells them what only God could tell them. This is for a divine purpose, and you'll see it as it unfolds. We looked at the fact that in verse 9 he indicates that I can go there right now in safety. My time has not yet come. He illustrates that by the illustration of walking in the day, Jesus knowing that he could go there safely. He was in the daytime of God's will. He was in the safety of God's will, and he could go there. But he waits until Lazarus is dead. Verses 11 through 14 is where we'll take our 15 is where we'll take our text for tonight. With all that introduction to refresh our memories. These things, verse 11, these things said he, and after that he saith unto them, Our friend Lazarus sleepeth, but I go that I may awake him out of sleep. Of course, they don't understand at first that he's talking about death. The disciples say, Lord, if he sleep, he shall do well. This is in their minds a good thing. He's resting, he's recuperating. Howbeit, verse 13, Jesus spake of his death, but they thought that he had spoken of taking rest in sleep. Then said Jesus unto them in verse 14 plainly, Lazarus is dead. We want to take our thoughts tonight and dwell on verse 15. I am glad for your sakes that I was not there, to the intent ye may believe. Nevertheless, let us go unto him. Lazarus is dead, so now let us go. And it would be easy for one, it would have been easy for them to say, but Lazarus is dead. Why go now? Maybe to go and comfort Mary and Martha, but in their minds Lazarus is dead, and that's the end of that. And he says in verse 15, let us go. Why now? Why go now? I mean, there could be just to be with the family and understand that, but in a deeper understanding of let us go in verse 15, the first answer of why go now is answered in verse 4, and we dwelt on that quite a bit. This is all for God's purpose. Everything that unfolds will be for God's purpose. And so let's go and let's experience those events. Let's see this unfold and how that it's going to unfold for your benefit, for your purpose. That the intent that ye may believe. Answer number 2 as to why they should go. 1, it will unfold according to his purpose. 2, that they might believe. Reminding you of what we read in John 6. They are indeed believers. He's not referring to that they would be convinced that he is the Christ. Peter said that. You're the Son of God. Peter said that. These things are truths that they had fully ingrained in their thinking. What is the Lord saying here when he says, to the intent that ye may believe? The idea of this believing in the Greek word that is used is to be further convinced, to give credit to. Why is this needed? Why do they need? They've seen the feeding of the multitudes. They've seen the Lord give sight to the blind. Using cross comparisons with other Gospels, they've seen him work all manner of miracles. They know who he is. And yet he tells them, let's go, because you need to be there, to the intent that ye may believe. Remember, and I love the next verse. Verse 16, then said Thomas, which is called Didymus, unto his fellow disciples, let us also go, that we may die with him. That was their concern all along, and that was their hesitation of going. If we go, they'll kill us. That's what they want to do. They were convinced, and they weren't far off. Their timing is a little off. They're probably a few months ahead of schedule on as far as the Jews actually taking Christ and murdering him upon the cross. But that's their hesitation. And Thomas demonstrates, we nicknamed him Doubting Thomas, but here he demonstrates a real submission to the plan of God, to the will of God, and a real willingness to go. And yet, this is the same Doubting Thomas that will, in probably a few months, say, I've got to see it to believe it. And that goes to the point of what Jesus is saying, let us go unto him. Why? Let's see God's purpose in all of this. Let's see what God unfolds in all of this. Let's see the power of the Son of God demonstrated right before your very eyes again. Why? Because we forget so quickly. Time dulls the memory many, many times. Until one forgets how gracious God is and how specific God is in the details, and how you can walk in the strength of God in unbelievable circumstances when he's with you, when you're in his will, when you're following his word. And we forget. We're so prone to forget. And he's laying the Lord is laying the groundwork to strengthen them and strengthen them and strengthen them. He's about to do that in 3 chapters of this gospel, 13, 14, and 15. Because we soon forget. Let us go, he says. Partly important because we're so prone to forget, and partly because the devil tries to whisper in our ear, this is not going to work like you want. This isn't going to work how you think it is. This is going to be hard for you, bad for you. The devil whispers all kinds of lies into the ears of the child of God. It's refreshing to see. It's encouraging to see. And I've run into a few over the years. The old saint of God that because of experience, because of years and years and years of walking with the Lord, just calm in any circumstance, at peace in any set of details. God's got this. You just watch. You just wait. And I've spoken with, one comes to my mind in particular, and I spoke with him about his calm, his patience, his endurance. And he smiled. And he said, wasn't always this way. The Lord took me through a lot to get me here. The Lord's taken the apostles through some more to get them to a point where they're stronger. And he says to the 12, let us go. It's time for more learning, more experiences. But we have to realize it's not always going to be fun. It's not always going to be easy. It's not always going to be painless. How many times do we illustrate that Paul followed the Lord so closely and yet describes in his letters what would almost seem like brutal experiences? But Paul doesn't begrudge any of them. Paul doesn't bemoan any of them. These things worked for my good and his glory. And Jesus says to the 12, let us go. There's time here for growth. We're going that ye may believe. How do you accomplish that? How does one grow in the grace and knowledge of the Lord? How does one grow in confidence in the Lord? And I tried to step back from this passage and look at what we could see as to our responsibility. And make no mistake, you and I have a responsibility to put ourselves in a position where we're following the Lord, obeying the Lord, walking with the Lord, walking according to the Word of God, that we might grow. He tells them over in the place of safety, pointing to the place of danger and pain. Lazarus is over here where they want Jesus dead. Lazarus is over here, already has died because of his illness. And Jesus says to the 12, let us all go over there. And he tells them why. That you may believe. That your strength or faith may be strengthened. That your faith may be more resolute because of another experience, built upon another experience, built upon another experience. But how do they accomplish that? I often say, and I hope when I do say it, people understand what I mean. The Lord rarely works in a vacuum. He can. He can impart strength and wisdom and knowledge. There's no problem. He has no lack of ability that He cannot do that. But He rarely works in a vacuum. He normally causes one to grow in strength and faith through difficulties, through tough experiences, through hard times. What's our tendency? Hard times ahead. I'm going around that. I don't want none of that. Hard times over there. I ain't going over there, Lord. They want to kill us over there. Hard times. But what does He tell them to do? Let's go. What are they responsible to do? Follow Him and go. The Lord gave them instruction. The Lord gave them direction. The first thing that is your responsibility and mine in the context of how might we position ourselves that we might grow in faith and strength in believing as He tells them. Well, from this text, the first thing that's most obvious, their responsibility was obey. He said, let's go. Some of them could have said, y'all go on ahead. I don't want it. But the first responsibility, the first point that you and I guess, have to grapple with, if I'm to grow, if I'm to learn what the Lord is to have me to learn through a given experience, I'm going to have to take His direction when He tells me to move in that direction and obey Him. They had to go with Him. They had to, by whatever means they chose to get there, they had to go there with Him. Knowing the danger, knowing the difficulty, not knowing altogether, only knowing that there was danger, only knowing that there were those that wanted to kill Christ. How are you and I going to grow in strength and knowledge and confidence? You have to walk with Christ. Wherever he's going, you have to go with him. I have to go with him. I can't be disobedient if the Lord is directing me to walk through a certain path, and I see that certain path looks like it might be hard, troublesome, difficult, and I do everything in my power to avoid it when the Lord's directing me through it. I'm not going to grow. I'm not going to have my faith strengthened by being disobedient. We must, first of all, walk in obedience with him. I notice in verse 16, Thomas gives another answer as to what we must do if we're going to position ourselves in such a way where the Lord can teach us and cause us to grow and cause our faith to be strengthened. Thomas gives us another indication to go along with obedience, but a willing submission to the plan of God, a willing submission to the purpose of God. Thomas was willing to go, assuming that going meant dying. But he was willing to go. We ran into that last week when we were looking at Paul and his willingness to go to Jerusalem in Acts chapter 20, and they told him not to go because they want to kill you there. And he's like, I'm bound in the Spirit. I've got to go. I will go. I don't know how this is going to turn out, other than that the gospel will be furthered. But if I die, I die. Thomas is of the same mind. And what's sobering about the fact that Thomas is of the same mind is that here he says this, and a few months later he said, I got to see it to believe it. Underscoring how quickly the flesh forgets. Underscoring how quickly man forgets. We must readily and quickly and joyfully submit to him. It goes with last week. We must be in a position where we know his will. We must be walking closely with him. We must be consistently in prayer, in communing with him. We must be consistently in our Bibles, letting the Word of God speak to us. And as the Lord impresses upon the child of God through the Word, through the Spirit, however the Lord uses to impress upon the child of God, we must be quick to obey when he says, let's go. There'll be times when the Spirit of God begins to work on your heart, and the Spirit of God says, I want you to go here. I want you to do this. I'm leading you to do that. And many, many times, we'll get out a spreadsheet. We'll get out a notebook and line some columns out, and they say, well, if I go this, this, and this, if I don't go this, this, and this. All the while, the Spirit of God is saying, I want you to go. And that is not, the will of God's not up for debate. The will of God here for them was not up for debate. Let's go. I have a purpose in this. I want to teach you. I want you to grow. You got to come with me. You got to see this. You have to experience this. It can't be that somebody emails you later and tells you what happened at the edge of the tomb of Lazarus. You got to be there. And you and I have to follow the Spirit's leadership, which necessitates that we are striving to be led of the Spirit and in tune to hearing this from the Spirit. But when he says go, we got to go quickly, joyfully, submitting to him, knowing that Romans 8:28 is still in the book. this will work together for my good. Might not be easy, might not be fun, might not be a cakewalk. But if He's in it, He'll strengthen you through it, and He'll teach you something along the way. But you got to go with Him. You got to walk with Him. You got to go into, from your perspective, the unknown. I don't know how it's going to turn out over there. But the Master said, let's go. So we bind up our sandals and we take off with Him and go. And we do that not grudgingly, not gripingly, not questioning. Lord, why didn't we go sooner? Why are we going now? Why are we going at all? This is the timing of the Lord. He had a purpose in all of it. This is when He said go. Translate that into the leadership on a daily basis of the Lord in your life. The direction He would have you to go. The timing He would have you to do things. And be striving constantly to know what that is. And to be striving constantly to see Him in the details. It's so easy to see everything but God in the details. The day goes right, we chalk it up to good planning. The day goes easy and we chalk it up to a well-laid plan on my behalf. Get through the day with success, and boy, I knocked it out of the park today. It's so easy to see, it's so easy to not see God in the details. But to see God in the details, you got to be there. So He said, let's go. Thomas pipes up and says, let's go, even if we die. And they were demonstrating, he was especially demonstrating submission to His will. And you and I need to do that. We must get past our critical questions when you ask God why in the wrong tone. Why me? Why this? Why now? When you ask that in the wrong tone, you're missing the point. He said, let's go. Yes, Lord. Let's go. What would you have me to learn in the process? How might I grow through this? Lord, teach me. Lord, show me what you'd have. He said, let's go. And we must go with Jesus. Even when we don't understand what He's doing. Even when we can't figure out why. Even when we don't see how the circumstances that I'm looking at could ever bring God any glory at all, if He's telling you to go, you got to go. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. Not around it, not over it, but through it. And the Good Shepherd is there every step of the way. He said, let's go. And we must go with Jesus. Even when things aren't going the way I think they ought to go. We make our prayer unto the Lord, but I do my best to say, nevertheless, thy will be done, Lord, not mine. And walk with Him. As our text indicates, He said, let's go. We must go with Him, even though it's sure danger or unpopular. There's experiences that are over there that are about to be had that will be another brick in the wall of your fortification. It'll be another cord in the stranding of the cable that holds you firm to Christ. You and I cannot stay in the safety beyond Jordan all the time. They couldn't stay there any longer. He said, let's go. And they had to go. And over time, and by the grace of God, that experience will build together with another experience, will build together with another experience. And it, in sum total, will grow in your mind to a place where you don't easily forget. I've walked with God too many years to forget. And I'm not talking about myself right now. I'm talking about the individual that has walked with God many, many years. I'm better than I was, but I wasn't talking to myself, about myself. We get to the place where we grow in the things of the Lord and confidence in the Lord because we've gone through experience after experience after experience, and we've seen the Lord deliver. We've seen the Lord get glory when we thought there was no way possible. We've seen the Lord work when we thought there was no way this could ever work and make any sense. We've seen the Lord, if you will, unscramble eggs. And only the Lord can. And He tells them, let us go. And it'll be for your good. Growing in wisdom, patient endurance, confidence, strength, courage, calm. Facing another storm. You see it in Paul's life. You see the shipwrecks and the beatings and the imprisonments, and you see the ongoing things that Paul endured. And you get to Acts 20 and you're like, yeah, I'm going to Jerusalem, might die, don't know. Spirit of God told me to go. Had bound in the Spirit, can't do anything else. He told me to go. I'm going to go. The Lord told them to go. They had to go to grow. If the Lord's telling you to go, you got to walk with Him. He'll carry you through. He'll strengthen you. More and more and more, you'll learn to lean more calmly and find strength in Him. Knowing a couple of things. He has a purpose in what He's taking you through. And knowing that He's going to get glory out of it. And here's the part that weighs on me and my responsibility. Knowing that how people see me enduring that storm, whatever it is, will reflect on Him. Oh, he's a Christian? Oh, he's a Christian and acts like that? Versus, oh, I believe he's a Christian. The way that he follows Christ. But here He told them they had to go. And they had no choice but to go. But it was for their good. And I pray that you could glean some nuggets out of that. When I read verse 15, I just didn't get past it. And could see that there needed to be some thoughts shared from it. And I pray that it was a blessing and encouragement.